My ex threw acid in my face, and now my family think he's the only person who can still love me, and they'll stop at nothing to get us back together. Samuel was waiting in the stairwell of my apartment building the night he attacked me. I'd broken up with him 3 months earlier because he'd gotten scary and possessive, showing up at my law school classes uninvited, demanding to put GPS trackers in my bag and car, the works. The breakup was messy, but I thought it was over until I came home from the library and found him standing there holding a bottle of industrial cleaner. He said if he couldn't have me, then nobody could. And before I could run, I felt liquid hit my face and everything turned into white, searing pain. I was screaming and clawing at my face while the smell of acid mixed with my own skin melting made me throw up right there in the stairwell. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later and couldn't see anything. The doctors explained that the chemical had destroyed my eyes completely, and I was permanently blind. My face was destroyed too. My nose was mostly gone. My lips were twisted and scarred, and the skin on my face was a patchwork of burns and grafts that would require 11 surgeries over the next few months. I moved back into my childhood bedroom at my parents' house and spent my days in physical therapy and mobility training with a white cane. My mom told me he'd been arrested and was in prison, and that he'd been writing letters every single day asking her to read them to me. I told her to throw them away because I never wanted to hear his name again. A few weeks later, my mom brought up the letters again while we were having breakfast, mentioning casually that Samuel was in therapy in prison and was deeply sorry for what he did. I told her I didn't care, and that I'd rather die than ever speak to him again. My sister started mentioning things from the letters when she visited, telling me how Samuel still thought I was beautiful, and I screamed at her to get out of my room. My dad sat me down and said Samuel's family had money and wanted to pay for experimental treatments in Europe, and I told him I'd rather stay blind forever than take money from the man who destroyed my life. They kept pushing, and I kept shutting them down harder each time, telling them they were insane for even suggesting I forgive him. I tried to move on with my life and made a profile on a dating app. I matched with a few guys, but every single one ghosted me the second I explained what happened to my face. I went on one actual date, and I could hear the guy's voice change when he saw me, and he made an excuse about a work emergency and left after 10 minutes. My family saw how devastated I was, and finally seemed to drop the Samuel thing. My mom said okay. She understood. She just wanted me to be happy with someone. A few weeks later, my sister mentioned that her husband's coworker had recently lost his vision in a car accident and was looking to meet other people in the blind community. His name was Julius, and he was a few years older than me and worked in physical therapy. She said he specifically wanted to meet someone who understood what he was going through, and that he'd seen my picture from before the attack and thought I seemed really interesting. She kept bringing up Julius over the next few weeks, telling me about his volunteer work and his dog and how he loved the same books I did. My mom said Julius's family was really nice and they'd love to meet me. I was hesitant but also desperate for any kind of connection, and everyone kept saying how perfect we were for each other since we were both navigating blindness. My sister called me a few months later and said Julius was ready to meet me, that he'd been asking about me constantly and was so excited for our date. She drove me to a restaurant and walked me to a table before telling me Julius would be there any minute. I heard her footsteps walk away, and I sat there trying to calm my breathing, hoping desperately that this would be different. I heard footsteps approaching, and someone pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. Then I heard a voice that made my blood turn to ice. "Hi, sweetheart. I've missed you so much." It was Samuel. I stood up so fast my chair fell backwards, and I called out for my sister, but nobody answered. I reached for my cane but couldn't find it, and I started moving in the direction I thought the door was while Samuel talked behind me about how my family set this up because we belonged together, how there was no Julius and there never had been. I found a wall and felt along it until I found a door handle and pulled, but it wouldn't open. I tried another door, but it was locked too. Samuel's voice was getting closer. "They locked us in here so we'd have to talk. This isn't a restaurant. They really want what's best for you." I screamed for help as loud as I could, my voice cracking and raw in my throat. Samuel kept talking behind me about how everyone just wanted what was best for us, how my family had worked so hard to set this up. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely keep them flat against the wall as I moved along it, feeling for any crack or seam that might be a window. The wall was smooth and cold under my palms, just painted drywall with nothing that felt like it would open. I moved faster, my fingers scraping along the surface, and found another corner. I turned and kept going, my breath coming in short gasps. Samuel's voice followed me around the room, calm and steady like he was discussing the weather instead of holding me prisoner. I found what felt like a window frame, but when I pushed on it, the glass wouldn't budge, and I realized it was probably painted shut or nailed closed. My chest felt tight and I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. I screamed again, louder this time, calling for anyone who might hear me. Samuel just kept talking about second chances and how love could overcome anything. I heard his footsteps getting closer to me, and panic shot through my whole body. I remembered the chair I'd knocked over when I first stood up, and I dropped to my hands and knees, sweeping my arms across the floor until I found it. I grabbed it and stood up fast, holding it in front of me with the legs pointing toward where I'd heard Samuel last. My arms were shaking from holding it up, but I kept it there like a weapon between us. The footsteps stopped moving, and I heard Samuel sigh. His voice changed completely, going from that fake understanding tone to something quieter and more controlled. It was the same voice he used to use right before he'd grab my wrist too hard, or back me into a corner in my apartment. The hair on my arms stood up, and I gripped the chair tighter. He said my name in that careful way, drawing it out slow, and I knew he was trying to decide if I was actually going to hit him with the chair. I moved it slightly, making sure he could hear it scrape the floor, and I told him to stay away from me. My voice didn't sound as strong as I wanted it to, but at least it didn't break. Samuel said my family was waiting right outside the door, and they weren't going to let either of us out until we talked things through like adults. He said they all agreed this was the only way to make me listen since I'd been so stubborn about refusing to read his letters. I felt something hot and angry rise up in my chest, and I yelled at him that the only thing I wanted to say was that he was a monster who destroyed my entire life. My voice got louder as I kept talking, telling him my family were monsters too for helping him do this to me. I said he took my eyes and my face and my whole future, and now he was taking my freedom too. The chair was getting heavy in my hands, but I didn't lower it. I told him I'd rather die than ever forgive him for what he did to me in that stairwell. My throat hurt from yelling, but I didn't care. I wanted him to hear how much I hated him, how there was nothing he could ever say that would change what he'd done. I heard a door open, and my sister Ruth's voice came from somewhere outside the room. She said they just wanted us to have a real conversation, that Samuel had changed so much in prison and gone through therapy. Her voice sounded so normal, like she was suggesting we all go out for coffee instead of admitting she'd helped kidnap me. I screamed at her that she was completely insane. I told her I would never forgive any of them for this. Not ever. Not if I lived to be 100 years old. My voice cracked on the last words, and I hated that she could probably hear me starting to cry. I yelled that she was my sister and she was supposed to protect me, not hand me over to the man who blinded me. Ruth said something back about how I wasn't being fair, how Samuel made a terrible mistake, but he was trying to make it right. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I screamed at her to let me out right now, that this was kidnapping and they were all going to jail. My mother's voice joined in from outside the door, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. She was pleading with me to just listen, to try to understand how hard this had been for Samuel too. She said he loved me so much and he'd been suffering every day since the attack, that he wanted nothing more than to take care of me for the rest of my life. The betrayal hit me so hard I actually couldn't breathe for a second. I bent over, still holding the chair, trying to get air into my lungs. My own mother was standing outside that locked door, and she cared more about my attacker's feelings than my safety. She valued his suffering over mine. I felt dizzy and sick, and I couldn't understand how this was happening. She kept talking about how Samuel's family had money and could help me, how he was my best chance at having someone who would love me despite what I looked like now. Each word felt like another acid burn on my skin. I straightened up and screamed at the door that I was calling the police right now. I said this was kidnapping and false imprisonment, and I knew the legal definitions because I was a law student. I told them they would all be arrested and charged, and I would make sure they went to jail for this. Ruth's voice came back, still sounding calm and reasonable, saying they weren't kidnapping me. She said they were just giving us some space to reconnect without outside pressure, that they'd research this intervention method. I heard my mother agree with her, both of them talking like they genuinely believed they were helping me. It hit me then that they really thought this was okay, that trapping me in a room with the man who threw acid in my face was some kind of loving gesture. They'd convinced themselves this was for my own good. I couldn't process how twisted their thinking had become. I yelled that giving someone space meant leaving them alone, not locking them in a room against their will. Samuel moved closer, and I heard his footsteps right in front of me. He said he just wanted to touch my hand, to show me he was still the same person who loved me. I swung the chair as hard as I could toward his voice. I felt it connect with something solid and heard him grunt in pain. The impact traveled up my arms, and I almost dropped the chair, but I held on. I heard him stumble backwards and something crashed, maybe him hitting a table or wall. My mother gasped from outside the door and started saying, "Oh my God," over and over. Ruth's voice got sharp, telling me there was no need for violence. I yelled back that Samuel was the one who taught me about violence when he melted my face off, and if he came near me again, I'd hit him harder. My hands were shaking worse now, but I kept the chair up. Samuel was breathing hard somewhere across the room and not talking anymore. I felt a tiny bit of satisfaction that I'd actually hurt him even though I was still trapped. I started screaming again about false imprisonment and how I knew exactly what the legal definitions were. I yelled that this met every single requirement for kidnapping charges, that they'd lured me here under false pretenses, and were holding me against my will. My voice was getting hoarse, but I kept going, listing off the specific laws they were breaking. I said I was a law student, and I would personally make sure the prosecutor threw the book at all of them. My mother's voice came back, but it was shaking now, not as confident as before. She said they would let me out in just a few hours. They just needed me to listen to Samuel first and give him a real chance to explain. She said if I would just calm down and talk to him like an adult, we could all go home and forget this ever happened. I told her I would never forget this, and neither would the police when I reported all of them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling to find the right buttons. I yelled that I was calling 911 right now and they were all going to be arrested. I heard Samuel move fast and suddenly his hands grabbed mine, yanking the phone away. I tried to hold on, but he was stronger and I heard it hit the floor. Then I heard him stomping on it over and over, the sound of glass and plastic breaking under his shoe. I screamed at him to stop, but he kept going until I couldn't hear any more crunching sounds. My phone was destroyed. I felt tears running down my face and I couldn't stop them. I was completely cut off now. No way to call for help. No way to contact anyone outside this room. Samuel was breathing hard from the effort, and I could smell his sweat in the air between us. The room went quiet except for my ragged breathing and the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I backed up until I felt the wall behind me and slid down to sit on the floor, still holding the chair across my lap. Samuel's voice came from across the room, soft and careful again. He said he just wanted a chance to explain himself, to tell me his side of what happened that night. I heard my mother and Ruth murmuring encouragement from outside the locked door, telling him to go ahead and talk, that I was finally listening. I wasn't listening, though. I was thinking about how I'd trusted my family to keep me safe and they'd sold me out to the man who destroyed my life. I was thinking about how I'd believed there was someone named Julius who might actually want to date me. I was thinking about how stupid I'd been to hope for anything good. I sat there in the dark that was my whole world now, trapped and alone with my attacker while my family cheered him on from the other side of a locked door. I backed up fast until I felt the corner of the room and slid down the wall to sit on the floor, my legs shaking too bad to hold me up anymore. I kept the chair in my lap like a shield and tried to remember everything from the self-defense classes they made me take during mobility training. Samuel's footsteps stayed across the room, and I could hear him breathing hard from where I'd hit him with the chair. He started talking in that soft voice he always used when he wanted something. He said he'd been going to therapy 3 times a week in prison, and his therapist said he had abandonment issues from his childhood that made him react badly to the breakup. He said he understood now that what he did was wrong, and he'd spent every single day working on himself, so he could be better for me. I couldn't listen to this garbage anymore, so I interrupted him. My voice came out shaky, but I didn't care. I told him that being sorry didn't give me back my eyes or my face or my law school career that I'd worked so hard for. My voice broke when I said he took everything from me, and now my family was helping him take even more by trapping me in this room. I heard Ruth's voice from outside the door, and she sounded annoyed like I was being difficult. She said I was being way too dramatic about this whole thing. She said they'd researched this intervention approach with a family counselor who specialized in reconciliation, and everyone agreed this was the best way to help me move forward. The words hit me like cold water, and I felt sick to my stomach. They'd planned this for weeks or maybe even months. They'd built the whole fake Julius profile and coordinated with Samuel and probably practiced what they were going to say. Every single conversation about Julius had been a lie designed to trap me here. I asked how long they'd been talking to Samuel, and my voice sounded weird and flat. My mother answered right away like she'd been waiting for me to ask. She said Samuel started writing letters to her about a month after the attack happened. She said his letters were so heartfelt and full of remorse that she just couldn't throw them away like I'd demanded. She said she could tell he was genuinely sorry and really loved me. The full scope of what they'd done crashed over me and I couldn't breathe right. They'd been secretly supporting my attacker this entire time while pretending to care about my recovery. Every sympathetic conversation about my therapy or my mobility training had been a lie while they plotted behind my back to force me back together with him. All those times my mother hugged me and said she just wanted me to be happy, she was planning this. All those times Ruth visited and acted like she cared, she was building the Julius lie. I told them they were accomplices to his crime now, and I would make sure the police knew they helped him get access to me again. My mother's voice got defensive and kind of shrill. She said they were just trying to help me find love since no one else was going to want me now with my face looking the way it does. Those words hurt worse than the acid had. I started crying even though I was trying so hard to stay strong and not let them see me break. Ruth's voice cut in and she said I needed to be realistic about my options now. She said Samuel already knows what I look like, and he still wants to be with me. She said that was more than I was going to get from anyone else. Samuel spoke up again from across the room. He said he would take care of me forever. He said he knew he caused all of this, but he wanted to spend the rest of his life making it up to me. I screamed at him that he was supposed to be in prison and demanded to know how he was even here in this room. My mother explained in this calm voice like she was talking about the weather. She said Samuel's lawyer got him released on bail while they appealed his conviction. She said his family put up their house as collateral to get him out. She said they'd all been working together for months to plan this reconciliation because they cared so much about my future happiness. I sat there in my corner with tears running down my ruined face and realized I was dealing with people who were completely out of their minds. They actually believed they were doing something good by trapping me in a room with the man who blinded me and destroyed my face. I forced myself to stop crying and wiped my face with my sleeve. I needed to stop falling apart and start thinking like the law student I used to be. I started going through everything I knew about kidnapping laws and false imprisonment and what evidence I would need if I ever got out of here. I thought about the layout of the room and where the doors were, and whether that window in the bathroom was really too small to fit through. Samuel was still talking about how much he loved me, but I tuned him out and focused on planning. I needed to get out of this room and away from these people who were supposed to protect me, but sold me out instead. I force my voice to stay calm and tell them I need to use the bathroom. There's silence for a moment, and then I hear Ruth and my mother whispering outside the door, but I can't make out the words. Ruth finally says okay, and I hear a key turn in the lock. The door opens, and Ruth's hand grabs my arm tight enough to hurt. She pulls me up from the corner and guides me out of the room. I try to memorize the path as we walk, counting steps and feeling for any changes in the floor. We turn left and walk maybe 15 steps before Ruth stops me and opens another door. She pushes me inside, and I hear her voice right behind me saying to hurry up. I reach out and feel cold tile walls and a sink. My hands shake as I feel around the small bathroom, searching for anything that could help me. There's a toilet, a sink with a soap dispenser, and a towel rack on the wall. I run my hands along the walls and find a small window up high. I reach up and feel the glass, but it's tiny, maybe a foot wide at most. Even if I could break it and climb up there, my shoulders wouldn't fit through. Ruth's voice comes through the door telling me I have 2 minutes. I keep searching and find a metal trash can, but it's empty. The cabinet under the sink only has some old cleaning supplies. I feel like screaming, but I make myself breathe slowly and use the toilet so Ruth doesn't get suspicious. I wash my hands, and Ruth opens the door before I'm done drying them. She grabs my arm again and walks me back to the room. I hear the lock click behind me, and Samuel's voice says he was worried about me. He moves closer, and I hear his footsteps on the floor. He tries to take my hand, and I jerk away so hard that I bang my shoulder against the wall. The pain shoots through my arm, but I don't care. I tell them I need my medication from their house, and my mother's voice says they'll bring it later after we make some progress. I ask what progress means, and she says, after I agree to give Samuel a real chance. I slide back down to my corner and wrap my arms around my knees. Hours pass, and they take turns trying to convince me. My mother talks about how Samuel's therapy has changed him. Ruth tells me about all the letters he wrote showing how sorry he is. Samuel keeps saying he wants to take care of me forever. I stay silent and focus on listening to everything around me. I hear a door open and close when someone leaves or enters. I hear footsteps above us sometimes, like there's another floor. The room has an echo that makes me think the ceiling is high. After what feels like forever, I finally hear something useful. Traffic sounds in the distance, faint but steady. Cars passing by, maybe a highway or busy street. The sound helps me understand we're not in a neighborhood where someone might hear me scream. The way sounds bounce around suggests we're in a big empty space, probably a commercial building like an old office or warehouse. That means yelling for help won't work because we're too far from anyone who could hear. My mother comes back into the room, and I hear her setting something down. She says she brought food and water. The smell of fast food fills the room, and my stomach hurts from hunger, but I don't move. She tells me I need to eat something, and I say I don't trust that it's not drugged. Her voice sounds hurt when she says she would never do that to me. I almost laugh because she already did something worse by trapping me here. I tell her I don't care about her feelings anymore after what she's done. She leaves the food near me and walks out. Time keeps passing, and I hear Samuel moving around the room. Eventually, his breathing changes and gets deeper. Then I hear snoring and realize he fell asleep. I stay perfectly still and listen. My family members are talking quietly outside the door. Ruth's voice says I'm being so stubborn. My mother agrees and says maybe they need to keep us here for a few days until I see reason. My father's voice joins in, saying they have time and I'll come around eventually. I wait until I'm absolutely sure Samuel is deeply asleep. The snoring is steady and loud. I carefully stand up and start exploring the room more thoroughly than before. I move slowly with my hands out in front of me. I find what feels like a desk with a smooth surface. Next to it is a filing cabinet with drawers that slide open. The drawers are empty, but the metal confirms we're in an abandoned office building. I keep moving along the wall and find another desk. I feel around on top and find nothing but dust. I crouch down and carefully open the drawers one by one, trying not to make noise. The first drawer has some old papers. The second drawer has paper clips and rubber bands. The third drawer has something metal, and I pick it up carefully. My fingers trace the shape, and I realize it's a letter opener, thin and pointed. I slip it into my pocket as quietly as possible. I keep exploring and find a phone jack in the wall. My heart jumps with hope, but when I feel around, there's no actual phone connected to it. I want to cry from how close I came to being able to call for help. I make myself keep searching, but I don't find anything else useful. I carefully make my way back to my corner and sit down. The letter opener presses against my leg through my pocket, and I feel slightly less helpless knowing I have something to defend myself with if I need to. I don't sleep at all that night. I just sit there listening to Samuel snore and thinking about how to get out of this. The next morning, I hear the door unlock and my mother comes in. She says she brought breakfast and asks if I slept okay. I ignore her question and tell her I need to speak to my Uncle Curtis. She's quiet for a moment and asks why. I say because he's the only family member who might actually listen to reason instead of being completely insane. She sounds defensive when she says they're not insane. They're trying to help me. I tell her that kidnapping someone isn't help, and Curtis will understand that even if she doesn't. She hesitates and then says she'll call him. I hear her footsteps leave the room and then leave the building entirely based on how the sounds fade. I sit there hoping desperately that Curtis will come and that he'll be on my side instead of theirs. I sit there in the dark waiting, and time crawls by so slowly, I can't tell if it's been 20 minutes or 2 hours. Samuel is still snoring across the room, and I hear my family members talking quietly outside, but I can't make out the words anymore. Then I hear new footsteps, heavier ones, and Curtis's voice cuts through everything else, asking what the hell is going on here. My mother starts explaining in that fake, calm voice, but Curtis interrupts her and his voice gets louder as he demands to know where I am. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Ruth tries to say something about giving us space, but Curtis sounds angrier than I've ever heard him when he tells her this is insane. The door unlocks and swings open, and Curtis calls my name. I stand up fast and move toward his voice while Samuel wakes up confused and my mother tries to block the doorway. Curtis asks me if I'm okay, and I grab onto his arm and tell him everything in a rush about the fake Julius profile and being trapped here with Samuel and my family locking the doors. His whole body goes tense under my hand, and he says, "This is kidnapping and they've lost their minds." I hear him push forward and my mother protests, but he's a big man and she can't stop him. Samuel's voice rises, saying they just wanted us to talk, but Curtis tells him to shut up and stay back. Ruth grabs my other arm, trying to pull me away from Curtis, but he shakes her off and tells her she's going to prison for this. My father's voice joins in from somewhere, saying they were trying to help me, but Curtis cuts him off and says helping would be respecting my choices, not trapping me with my attacker. He guides me quickly through the door and I stumble but hold tight to his arm. My mother follows us, saying we need to calm down and talk about this, but Curtis keeps moving and tells her to stay away from both of us. We go down what feels like stairs, and I hear my family's footsteps behind us, but Curtis moves fast. The air changes and I know we're outside, and Curtis helps me into his car. My whole body starts shaking so hard my teeth chatter and I can't make it stop. Curtis gets in the driver's seat and locks the doors, and I hear my mother banging on the window. He starts the engine and pulls out while calling someone on his phone. His voice is still angry when he tells his wife to meet us at the police station and that I need a lawyer right now. I try to say thank you, but my voice comes out as a sob, and Curtis reaches over and squeezes my shoulder, saying, "It's okay. I'm safe now. He's got me." The drive feels both endless and too short, and my hands won't stop shaking in my lap. Curtis parks and comes around to help me out, and his wife must have arrived fast because I hear her voice asking what happened. Curtis gives her the short version while walking me inside, and I hear the shock in her voice. Inside the police station, Curtis talks to someone at a desk, and then an officer leads us to a room. The officer's voice is kind when she asks me to tell her what happened, and I start from the beginning with my sister setting up the fake date. My voice shakes, but I get through the whole story about being locked in that room with Samuel and my family refusing to let me out. The officer asks questions, and I answer everything while Curtis sits next to me. She sounds horrified when she says they're sending units right now to arrest my mother, Ruth, and Samuel for kidnapping and violating Samuel's bail conditions. Another officer comes in and asks more questions, and I have to repeat parts of the story until my throat hurts. They take photos of my cane that my family took, and the clothes I'm wearing, and document everything. Finally, they say I can go, and Curtis helps me back to his car. At his house, his wife shows me to their guest room and helps me sit on the bed. She brings me water and asks if I need anything, but I can't answer because everything hits me at once. My own mother and sister trapped me with the man who blinded me and destroyed my face. They chose him over me. They thought forcing me into that room was helping. I start crying and can't stop, and Curtis's wife sits next to me and rubs my back. I sob about how my family betrayed me and I have nowhere to go now, and she says I can stay here as long as I need. Curtis comes in and his voice is gentle when he says the police arrested all 3 of them and Samuel is back in custody. I cry harder because even though they're arrested, it doesn't change what they did. The next morning, I wake up disoriented in the unfamiliar room and hear Curtis talking to someone on the phone. He knocks and comes in, saying there's a lawyer named Solomon Hardy from Legal Aid who wants to talk to me. I take the phone, and Solomon's voice is professional but warm when he introduces himself. He says Curtis called him last night and explained the situation, and he wants to help. Solomon tells me I have strong cases for restraining orders against my entire family and for suing them for emotional distress and false imprisonment. His confidence makes me feel slightly less helpless, and I agree to meet with him. Curtis drives me to Solomon's office later, and Solomon goes through everything methodically. He asks detailed questions and takes notes and explains the legal process. He says the criminal charges against my family are serious, and the prosecutor is pushing hard because of the severity. I learn that Samuel was arrested at the scene and his bail was revoked immediately, so he's back in prison. My mother and Ruth were also arrested, but they posted bail and got released pending trial. Solomon says they're facing kidnapping charges, conspiracy, and aiding a bail violation. The restraining orders should be approved quickly given what happened. Back at Curtis's house that afternoon, the phone rings and Curtis answers, then hands it to me saying it's for me. A woman's voice says my name and asks if I remember her. It takes me a second, but then I recognize Madison Yoon from law school. She says she heard what happened through mutual friends, and she's been wondering how I was doing since the attack. Her voice doesn't have that careful pity tone everyone else uses, and something in my chest loosens. She asks if she can come visit, and I say yes. Madison arrives an hour later and Curtis shows her to the guest room. She sits down and starts talking like we're just catching up as friends. She doesn't ask intrusive questions about my face or my blindness or treat me like I'm made of glass. We talk for hours about everything from law school gossip to terrible reality TV shows. She tells me about her new apartment and her annoying neighbor and her terrible dating life. I find myself laughing for the first time in days. When I mention needing to find somewhere to stay, Madison interrupts and says she has a spare room in her apartment. She says her roommate just moved out and she'd love to have me stay there. Her offer sounds genuine, not like charity, and I feel tears building again, but good ones this time. She squeezes my hand and says she means it, that we're friends and friends help each other. I tell her about the legal stuff Solomon is handling, and she listens carefully and asks smart questions. She doesn't act shocked or horrified, just matter of fact about next steps. Before she leaves, she gives me her spare key and says to move in whenever I'm ready. After she's gone, I sit in the guest room holding the key and feeling like maybe I can actually survive this. 2 days later, Madison drives me to her apartment and walks me inside. She takes my hand and guides me through each room, describing the layout in clear, simple terms. The kitchen is straight ahead from the front door. Bathroom is the first door on the right. Her bedroom is at the end of the hall, and my room is the second door on the left. She asks what I need to make the space work for me instead of just assuming, and I feel myself relax a little because she's treating this like a practical problem to solve instead of a tragedy. We spend the afternoon arranging furniture so I can move around easily, and she shows me where she keeps dishes and food and explains her system for organizing things. That night, I lie in bed in my new room and feel something close to safe for the first time since the attack happened. The next morning, Solomon calls and says he's filing for restraining orders against my mother, Ruth, and Samuel. He explains the process and tells me the judge will review the kidnapping evidence and likely approve the orders quickly. 3 days later, Solomon calls back with good news. The judge granted all 3 restraining orders immediately, and they're now legally required to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. If any of them violate the order, they'll be arrested on the spot. I thank Solomon and hang up feeling like I have some actual protection now. A week after I move in with Madison, my phone rings with an unknown number. I answer cautiously, and a man's voice introduces himself as Kai Monahan from the Blind Community Center. He says he heard about my case through disability networks and wants to help me develop better skills for living independently. His voice is warm but matter-of-fact, and he mentions he's been blind since birth, so he's navigated this his whole life. I agree to meet with him, and we set up a time for later that week. When Kai arrives at Madison's apartment, he shakes my hand firmly and gets right to business. He asks what mobility training I've had so far, and I explain the basic cane work from the hospital. He makes a thoughtful sound and says there's a lot more I should know. Over the next 2 hours, he teaches me techniques I never learned, showing me how to use my cane more effectively, and telling me about technology that can help with daily tasks. He pulls out devices that read text aloud and apps that identify objects through my phone's camera. He talks about blindness like it's just a different way of moving through the world instead of some terrible tragedy, and something in my chest loosens. We agree to meet twice a week for training sessions. The following Monday, Madison drives me to my first appointment with Phoebe Lowery, a therapist who works with trauma survivors. Solomon connected me with her, and she agreed to see me on a sliding scale since I don't have money right now. In her office, I sit on a couch that's soft, but not too soft, and Phoebe's voice is calm when she introduces herself. She asks if I want to talk about what happened, and I find I can barely speak. My throat closes up and I just shake my head. She says that's okay. We can go at whatever pace I need, and there's no pressure to share anything before I'm ready. The session passes with her asking gentle questions about what I need to feel comfortable and safe, and I leave feeling like maybe therapy won't be as awful as I feared. 2 days later, the prosecutor handling the criminal case against my family calls me. He introduces himself and explains that my mother and Ruth are facing kidnapping charges, conspiracy charges, and endangering charges. Samuel is facing additional charges for violating his bail conditions and for intimidation. The prosecutor's voice is serious when he says they're pushing hard on these cases because of how severe the situation was. He asks if I'm willing to testify if the cases go to trial, and I say yes without hesitation. After we hang up, he calls back an hour later with more information. He says Samuel's original conviction for the acid attack is being appealed by his lawyers, but the new charges from the kidnapping have destroyed any chance of his sentence being reduced. In fact, the prosecutor expects Samuel will get additional years added to his sentence when everything is finalized. I feel a fierce satisfaction hearing that. Madison helps me start the paperwork for emergency financial aid and disability benefits that same week. We sit at her kitchen table and she reads through forms, explaining what each section means and helping me fill everything out. The process is way more complicated than it should be, with endless questions about my condition and my finances and my family situation. Madison stays patient through all of it, looking up information we need and making phone calls to various offices to get answers. She never acts annoyed or like this is a burden, just treats it like something we're working through together step by step. A few days later, a woman named Ellie Wagner from Disability Rights Advocacy calls me. Solomon gave her my information, and she wants to help me file complaints against my family for financial abuse. She explains that because they controlled my money and used it to manipulate me, I have grounds to take legal action. Her voice is fierce and confident when she talks about protecting vulnerable adults from family members who take advantage. She helps me file the complaints and walks me through setting up my own bank account that my family can't access or control. By the end of the call, I feel like I have another person in my corner who actually understands how bad this situation is. That weekend, Curtis calls to check on me and mentions that my mother has been trying to send me letters through him. He says he's been refusing to pass them along because he knows I don't want contact with her. I thank him for that, and he tells me what the letters say anyway. My mother is claiming she was just trying to help me find happiness and doesn't understand why I'm so angry about everything. Curtis's voice is disgusted when he repeats her words. He says she genuinely seems to believe that setting up the kidnapping was an act of love, and that she's the victim here because I won't forgive her. I tell Curtis to keep throwing away any letters she sends, and he promises he will. My first therapy session with Phoebe happens 2 days later in her office that smells like lavender and has soft carpet under my feet. I sit on what feels like a leather couch, and she sits across from me in a chair that creaks when she moves. She asks me to tell her what happened, and I start with the kidnapping, but she stops me and asks me to go back further, to when my family first started pushing me toward Samuel after the attack. I talk for almost an hour about every letter they tried to make me read, every guilt trip about how Samuel still loved me, every time they made me feel like I was being unreasonable for not forgiving the man who blinded me. Phoebe listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she says something that makes me start crying. She tells me that what my family did was abuse, that using my disability and isolation to manipulate me into seeing my attacker was not love or good intentions. It was control and harm. She says I don't owe them forgiveness just because they're family, and that cutting them off completely is a valid and healthy choice. I cry so hard I can barely breathe because someone finally understands how bad this was, how wrong they were. The preliminary hearing gets scheduled for 3 weeks later, and the prosecutor calls me the day before to prepare me for what will happen. He explains that I'll have to testify about everything that happened in that locked room, that my mother and Ruth will be there with their lawyers, and that the defense will try to make it seem less serious than it was. I tell him I can handle it, and he says he believes me. Curtis drives me to the courthouse the next morning and walks me inside, his hand steady on my elbow as we navigate the halls. The courtroom is cold and echoey, and I can hear people shuffling papers and whispering. The prosecutor guides me to the witness stand, and I put my hand on the Bible even though I can't see it. I testify about hearing Samuel's voice when I expected Julius, about trying to find doors that were all locked, about my family standing outside telling me to give him a chance while I begged them to let me out. My voice stays level and clear even though my hands are shaking. I hear my mother crying somewhere in the courtroom, but I keep talking, describing every detail of those hours trapped with the man who destroyed my face. The defense lawyer asks me questions trying to suggest my family just wanted to help me find love, and I shut that down hard by pointing out that kidnapping is not help. The judge asks a few questions and I answer each one directly, never wavering in my account of what they did. After I finish testifying, Curtis touches my shoulder and walks me back to our seats. I hear the lawyers arguing about evidence and charges for another hour. The judge finally speaks, and his voice is firm when he says he finds more than enough evidence to proceed to trial on all charges. My mother's lawyer tries to argue for reduced charges, saying she's a respected member of the community with no prior record, and Ruth's lawyer makes similar arguments. The judge denies both requests and says the charges will stand as filed because what they did was planned, deliberate, and put me in serious danger. Curtis squeezes my hand, and I feel something loosen in my chest, knowing that the legal system is actually taking this seriously. Madison comes over for dinner at her apartment that night, and while we're eating, she brings up law school in this casual way that makes it clear she's been thinking about it. She says I'm one of the smartest people she knows, and that being blind doesn't change my brain or my ability to understand complex legal concepts. I tell her I'm not ready yet, that I'm still dealing with too much, but she says she's not pushing me to do it now. She just wants me to know that she sees a future for me beyond all this trauma, that I can still become a lawyer if I want to. Something about the way she says it, like it's just a fact and not some impossible dream, makes me actually consider it for the first time since the attack. Kai calls me a few days later and says he wants to introduce me to some people. He picks me up and drives me to a coffee shop where I meet 3 other blind adults who are all working in professional careers. There's a lawyer named Jennifer who uses screen reader technology and has been practicing for 15 years. There's a high school teacher named Marcus who teaches history and uses audio textbooks and assistive devices. There's a woman named Stephanie who owns her own marketing business and manages a team of 5 employees. They all talk about their lives in this matter-of-fact way, discussing the challenges of being blind in a sighted world, but also making it clear that they're living full, successful lives. Jennifer tells me about accommodations available in law school and the bar exam, and Marcus talks about how teaching actually made him better at listening and connecting with students. Meeting them shifts something in my head because I've been thinking of blindness as this ending, but they're all proof that it's just a different way of existing in the world. Solomon sets up a meeting at his office the following week to discuss the civil lawsuit. He explains that I have strong grounds to sue my family for damages, including my therapy costs, the assistive technology I need, lost educational opportunities from having to leave law school, and emotional distress. He walks me through what the lawsuit would involve and says he's confident we have a solid case given that they're facing criminal charges for the same incident. I tell him to file it, and he starts gathering documentation and preparing the paperwork. He says cases like this usually settle out of court because families don't want the publicity of a trial, and that he'll push hard to get me fair compensation. 3 months pass with me living at Madison's place, going to therapy twice a week, meeting with Solomon about the lawsuit, and learning new skills from Kai. The prosecutor calls one morning to tell me that my mother and Ruth have accepted a plea deal to avoid going to trial. They're pleading guilty to false imprisonment and conspiracy charges, and they'll get probation, community service, and mandatory counseling instead of jail time. Part of me wants them to go to prison, but another part is relieved I won't have to testify in a full trial. The prosecutor explains that the plea deal includes specific provisions that they have to stay away from me and can't contest the restraining orders. Solomon calls later that same day and says this actually strengthens our civil case because their guilty pleas are an admission of wrongdoing. He says the restraining order provisions give me legal protection that extends beyond their probation period, meaning they can't come near me even after they complete their sentences. Samuel's trial for the new charges happens 2 weeks after my family's plea deal. The prosecutor calls to tell me the outcome, and there's satisfaction in his voice when he says Samuel got an additional 5 years added to his sentence. The judge specifically called out how bad his actions were, pointing out that he committed these crimes while out on bail for attacking me in the first place. The prosecutor says Samuel tried to argue that my family invited him, and he didn't know I was being held against my will, but the evidence made it clear he was fully involved in planning the whole thing. Hearing that he'll be locked up for years longer makes me feel safer than I have since the attack. Kai asks me if I want to start volunteering at the Blind Community Center, and I say yes immediately. He trains me on how to help newly blind people learn basic mobility skills with a white cane, teaching them the techniques that I struggled to learn after the attack. My first day volunteering, I work with a woman named Carol who lost her vision in a car accident 6 months ago. I show her how to sweep the cane properly, and how to listen for changes in sound that indicate obstacles or openings. Teaching her feels powerful because I'm using what happened to me to help someone else, turning all that pain and fear into something useful. Carol thanks me at the end of the session and says it helps to learn from someone who really understands what she's going through. I leave the center that day feeling capable and strong instead of just being someone who survived something terrible. Madison starts coming over to my apartment more often, and we fall into an easy friendship that feels natural instead of forced. She describes the apartment building layout when I ask but doesn't hover or over-explain basic things, treating my blindness like just another fact about me instead of my whole identity. We order takeout and watch reality TV shows together, with her giving me quick descriptions of the visual stuff that matters, but mostly just laughing with me about the ridiculous drama. She tells me about her terrible dates and annoying coworkers, and asks my advice on normal stuff, and I realize this is the first real friendship I've had since the attack, where someone sees me as a whole person. One night, she's painting her nails on my couch and describing the color to me, and I feel this wave of gratitude that she chose to stick around when she could have just moved on with her life. Solomon calls a few weeks later with news about the civil lawsuit, and his voice sounds satisfied when he tells me my family agreed to settle out of court. The settlement amount will cover all my therapy costs, the assistive technology I need, and my living expenses while I figure out my next steps. He says he pushed hard during negotiations and got me a fair amount that reflects the serious harm they caused. My mother and Ruth didn't want to risk a trial where all the details would become public record, so they agreed to pay rather than face that exposure. Solomon explains the payment structure and timeline, making sure I understand all the terms before I sign anything. The money won't fix what they did, but it gives me financial independence from them, which feels like taking back control of my life. Curtis calls me the next day, and his voice is careful when he tells me that my mother keeps asking about me through him. She wants to apologize in person and keeps saying she needs to explain herself, and Curtis is clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle. I tell him I'm not ready to see her and I might never be ready, that her apology doesn't change what she did or make it hurt less. He says he understands completely and he'll keep being a buffer between us for as long as I need. I can hear the relief in his voice that I'm not pressuring him to take sides, and I tell him I appreciate everything he's done to support me. He mentions that he's made it clear to my mother that he thinks what she did was wrong and that he respects my decision to stay away. I enroll in online law school classes to finish the degree that Samuel's attack interrupted, and the first day is harder than I expected. The screen reader technology reads everything aloud, and I'm using audio versions of the textbooks, but keeping up with the material takes intense focus. I have to replay sections multiple times to catch details I would have seen immediately before, and taking notes without being able to see what I'm writing feels awkward and slow. My first assignment takes me 3 times longer than it should have, but I submit it anyway, determined not to let blindness stop me from finishing what I started. The professor emails back with encouragement and some tips for adaptive study techniques, and I feel a spark of hope that maybe I can actually do this. In therapy, Phoebe helps me work through complicated feelings about my appearance and whether I'll ever date again. I tell her about the failed dating app attempts, and how hearing that guy's voice change when he saw my face made me want to disappear. She asks me questions about what I think my worth is based on, and whether I believe I deserve love only if someone finds me attractive. The conversation is uncomfortable but necessary, and by the end, I'm starting to separate my value as a person from whether anyone wants to date me. I'm not ready to try dating again, and maybe I never will be. But I'm beginning to believe that being alone doesn't mean I'm worthless or unlovable. Kai calls and asks if I'd be willing to speak at a disability rights conference about my experience navigating the legal system as a blind person. My stomach drops at the idea of standing in front of a room full of strangers and talking about the worst thing that ever happened to me. But Kai explains that a lot of blind people face family manipulation and legal barriers, and hearing from someone who fought back successfully could help them advocate for themselves. I tell him I'm nervous, but I'll do it because I want to use what happened to me to help other people in similar situations. He sounds pleased and says he'll help me prepare and be there to support me during the speech. The conference is 2 weeks later, and I practice my speech with Madison until I can deliver it without my voice shaking too much. Standing at the podium with the microphone in front of me and knowing hundreds of people are watching makes my hands sweat and my heart pound. I start talking about the attack and the kidnapping and how my family betrayed me, focusing on the legal steps I took to protect myself and get justice. My voice gets stronger as I go, and I can feel the audience paying attention. And when I finish, there's applause that sounds genuine instead of just polite. Afterward, several people approach me to share their own stories of family betrayal and legal struggles, and one woman tells me my speech gave her courage to file for a restraining order against her abusive brother. I realize I'm not alone in this experience, and that speaking up about it matters more than I thought. Madison throws me a small celebration when I finish my first semester of online law school, and my grades come back strong. She invites Kai and Curtis and a few other friends I've made through the community center, and we eat pizza in my apartment while they congratulate me. Curtis brings me flowers and tells me how proud he is of how far I've come, and Kai jokes about how I'm going to be a better lawyer than most sighted people he knows. I sit on my couch surrounded by people who genuinely care about me and chose to be in my life, and I feel something I haven't felt in months, like maybe things can actually be okay. Solomon calls the next week and offers me a part-time internship at his legal aid office working on disability rights cases. He says my perspective as a blind person and survivor would be valuable for understanding what clients are going through and advocating effectively for them. I accept immediately, excited to use my experience and legal training to help other people navigate systems that weren't built for them. He explains the internship structure and what kind of cases I'd be working on, and I can barely contain my enthusiasm about finally doing meaningful work again. Curtis stops by my apartment a few days later and tells me that my mother and Ruth completed their court-ordered counseling, but still don't fully understand why their actions were wrong. The counselor's report said they showed up and participated but maintained that they were trying to help me find happiness. Curtis says he's made it clear to them that he supports my decision to stay away, and that their refusal to accept responsibility proves I'm making the right choice. I thank him for continuing to stand up for me even though it's made his relationship with his sister difficult, and he says families should protect each other, not trap them with their abusers. A few weeks after that conversation with Curtis, I start looking at accessible apartments with help from a housing advocate Ellie connected me with. We visit 6 different places, and I reject most of them because the layouts are confusing, or the landlords seem uncomfortable with my cane and my face. The 7th apartment feels right the moment I walk through the door. The advocate describes the open floor plan and wide doorways, and I move through each room feeling how logically everything connects. The kitchen has talking appliances already installed, and the bathroom has grab bars and a walk-in shower with a built-in seat. I sign the lease that afternoon, and Madison immediately volunteers to help me move. 2 weeks later, she picks me up in a borrowed truck, and we load the few belongings I've accumulated at Curtis's house. Madison drives us to the new place, and we spend hours arranging furniture and unpacking boxes, with her describing where everything is, and me memorizing the layout by touch. By evening, we're exhausted and sitting on my living room floor eating pizza straight from the box. Madison tells me about a disastrous date she went on, and I laugh harder than I have in months. And something shifts inside me as I realize this is my space that I chose, with a friend who sees me as a whole person instead of a victim or a project. The next morning, I wake up in my own bedroom and make coffee in my own kitchen, and the independence feels almost overwhelming in the best possible way. 6 months after the kidnapping, I'm working 3 days a week at Solomon's legal aid office helping clients navigate disability discrimination cases. I take the bus to work using routes Kai helped me learn, and I use my screen reader to review case files and draft legal documents. My law school classes are going well, and I'm on track to graduate next year, and my professors have been accommodating about my assistive technology needs. Madison comes over most Friday nights, and we cook dinner together or order takeout and watch TV with the audio description turned on. Kai invited me to join a recreational goalball league for blind athletes, and I go every Tuesday evening, and the physical activity helps when the anger at my family builds up too much. Curtis texts me every few days to check in, and sometimes we meet for coffee, and he never pushes me to forgive his sister or my parents, even though I know it's hard for him. The prosecutor's office sent me a letter saying Samuel's new charges resulted in additional prison time, and that my mother and Ruth completed their probation requirements, but the restraining orders remain in effect. Some mornings I still wake up touching my face and feeling the twisted scar tissue and wishing I could see again. Some days I'm so angry at what my family did that I have to call Phoebe for an emergency session. But I'm building something real here with people who chose to be in my life, instead of people who felt obligated by blood. I'm learning that being blind doesn't mean being helpless, and being scarred doesn't mean being broken. The darkness is permanent and the scars won't fade, but I'm creating a future that's mine on my own terms, and that's more than I thought possible when I was trapped in that room with Samuel 6 months ago. Well, that's another perfectly average ending. If you're still here, congratulations on your questionable taste. Go ahead and subscribe. We've both committed now.